morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear viewers, our beloved speakers. We're here on a new edition in our panels discussing diverse topics of geopolitical interest to Poland, Europe, the transatlantic sphere, and the rest of the world. Welcome. In this edition, we're going to discuss the Indo-Pacific and the Central Eastern European countries, both respectives. Quite a hot topic. Now, I would like to begin by welcoming our beloved speakers, Dr. Joanna Siskera and Chava Barnabas Horvath from the Danube Institute and our international lawyer. Welcome. Dr. Joanna Siskera, international lawyer with an extensive trajectory working in different countries, including Finland, Norway, New Zealand, among others. Dr. Joanna is an international lawyer, doctor of public policy from Poland. She works as a legal advisor to various military institutions as a subject matter expert at NATO Stability Policy Center of Excellence in Vicenza, Italy, and the Finnish Defence Forces International Center in Helsinki, Finland, as well as a fellow at the United States Marine Corps Brut Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare. Dr. Siskera did her postdoctoral research at the Faculty of Law, University of Bergen, Norway, and PhD studies in New Zealand at the Faculty of Law in Wellington. She is the author of over 100 scientific publications in several languages, 40 legal opinions for the Polish Ministry of Justice, as well as the book Regional Policy in the South Pacific, and the editor of 7 monographs on international law, international relations, and security. Her areas of expertise are law warfare, legal culture in armed conflict, and NATO legal framework and the Indo-Pacific region, Pacific law, and maritime security. Recently edited and published the book Security in the Indo-Pacific and Development of Oceania, the Commonwealth's presence in the region, along with many contributing authors. She's currently working in a new book, which we'll discuss soon. Thanks for being with us today. It's actually quite an impressive curriculum. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Chava Barnabas Horvath is a PhD doctor, historian, and political scientist, member of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. Dr. Horvath is a senior researcher at the Danube Institute in Hungary, and under different visiting research schemes, Dr. Horvath worked at the Australian National University in Canberra, Australia, the Fudan University in Shanghai, China, and the National Chengchi University in Taipei, Taiwan. Also performed public tasks in Malaysia, invited by the Penang Institute and the Tunku Abdul Rahman University, and in Singapore, invited by the Nanyang Yang Technological University. Welcome. What a panel, ladies and gentlemen. What a panel. Quite an impressive curriculum we have here with our both experts who will discuss the Indo-Pacific today. Welcome once again. Now, before we begin, let me introduce with a few words. Until a few years back, the term Indo-Pacific was hardly uttered in international affairs. Today, the term commands the leading discussions in public forums, joining the Great Pacific with the Indian Ocean into free and open Indo-Pacific. Now, much focus is given to India and naturally China, and more recently, more Taiwan, arising the new regional superpowers. Therefore, the term recently connotates a more open approach to limit the rise of China. But what does this mean, this term and these relations? What does this mean to the region for Central Eastern European countries, particularly for the B4 as Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic? On the one hand, we have fewer economic and strategic interests in the region compared to the United States, for instance, or the UK, than in Western European neighbors. On the other hand, it is an area of the world that no European country can afford to overlook. We have definitely economic interests. In early September, just to mention, September 2021, the Czech Republic appointed a new special envoy to lead the Indo-Pacific relations. Similarly, Lithuania recognized a threat posed by China and has been actively seeking to establish relations in the Indo-Pacific. Now, Polish relations, on the one hand, in India have intensified, and Hungary remains in the spotlight on topics related to the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, Central Europe has benefited greatly from economic interactions with the region, predominantly with South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. Now, let me stop talking right now and turn to our experts. Let me begin with Joanna. Now, Joanna, Poland does not have its own Indo-Pacific strategy, and most of Central European countries reflect on the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy of 2021. But why is that? Could you please shortly explain the relevance of the Indo-Pacific, not only for Central Eastern countries, but in general? Why is the focus so relevant nowadays?
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, kia ora, bula vinaka, aloha. So, Pacific greetings to all of you and our viewers. I am very grateful that we are having this panel because, exactly, Katya, as you said, we in Europe, especially Central Europe, we do not focus on Indo-Pacific. Either this is ignorance or I don't know how to call it, but the Indo-Pacific is in the game for already some time. As you pointed out, it was not that relevant in the previous century, but now 21st century is officially called the Pacific century. This is the center of gravity for politics, for military, that is security, but also new disruptive technology. We have great power competition happening over there. We have crossroads of maritime and aviation, transportation, and finally, we have enormous raw materials at the seabed of Pacific Island. And me, myself, I am preaching that the future war will happen exactly there in the Pacific. As you can see at the back, there is a map. So I am really certain that we here in Europe, we must do a lot of research, but also open ourselves on the politics, on legal and political matters in the Pacific. And why Poland is not interested, why not Poland is present. At the beginning of this month, there was this famous security meeting, Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. And there were some representatives of Europe, every head of Ministry of Defense from Indo-Pacific, but there was no Polish representative or any other from the Central Europe. So I'm asking why we still focus on Europe, why we still see only Russia as a threat, but we don't see China. And I know that we will talk about that today also, but here are just my latest thoughts on that we are still undermine the relevance of Indo-Pacific in our Central European countries.
Thank you, Joanna. Indeed, it is quite a very complicated yet interesting relations. Now, Chava, you're a historian, a quite experienced historian. Please walk us through this complexity. What makes the Indo-Pacific unique, and why is it so complicated or so difficult, not only to understand but also to model through and to analyze and to approach?
Well, it is extremely complex in terms of history. For most of history, China and India have been civilizations as different as almost as any of the two from Europe. So it's like a region of a larger scale than Europe. But what I want to point out as a practical issue of our days is that an issue that I just made some research that I'm currently doing the research on, that it seems that it that we are approaching a point which could be called peak China, that this explosive growth of China that we witnessed throughout the first two decades of the 21st century will will not continue in the upcoming decades, and China's share in the global GDP will likely peak around 2030, and its share in the GDP of Asia is already on the peak during this decade. So, this means, and like India is catching up rapidly. So this suggests that instead of Chinese dominance, the Asia Pacific itself is shifting towards a multipolar role, a multipolar system within itself, with an ever increasing role of India catching up to China. Indonesia is also showing a more rapid economic growth than China. So I think on the one hand, this on the one hand this indeed will be the Pacific century, but on the other hand, China is about to gradually lose the capabilities to expand its power in the Asia Pacific as other middle and great powers such as India and Indonesia are catching up to it, and the growth of China itself is slowing down.
Power as well. Now, it is known that Poland has close relations with India. I mean, relations that date back since World War II. I mean, they have quite the commitment with one another. Now, Chaba, please elaborate a little bit, or help us understand what is the relationship, or how the relationship between Budapest and Beijing has developed over time. Now, this is quite the topic for interest, as it develops into the relationship with Central Eastern European countries with China, and definitely has modeled Hungary's position both in the V4 countries, in Europe, and in NATO.
Well, I think the main drive behind Hungarian policies towards China was the intent to diversify trade relations. So geopolitics was not that much in mind. So it's a question whether this will change or not in the upcoming decades.
Joanna, please, would you like to comment on both either
Yes.
Polish, India, or yes?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, just a little build up on what my colleague just said, that 21st century is not China century, it's the Pacific. When we talk about Pacific, it's not only China and India, it's the whole amount of countries in between, including Oceania countries. They are parts of United Nations and also multitude of regional organizations, and their voice is becoming stronger, not only because of climate change and sea level rise, but their importance in this big puzzle, in great power competition. And what China is doing in Europe, this is something very important, and we still don't see that when we talk also about NATO. Only recently China was put there as not even a threat, because still European countries and they see only Russia as a threat, but the US of course sees China as a peer competitor. So this is very important to look. So many critical infrastructures is built or is owned now by China. And when I talk China, I mean a Chinese Communist Party. So we have to be aware of that what's happening in the Indo-Pacific when China is corrupting those tiny little governments, very unstable, for whom law and democratic principles, they are something new. They are imposed by British, by French colonizers. They are very weak. So of course, who is taking the chance? China. And the same we start to observe in Europe with all the critical infrastructure, like the largest harbor in Athens, that is Piraeus, like the largest shipping port in Hamburg, Germany, and I can go on with that. So this is very essential to be aware that we do not talk against China per se, but we talk against value systems of undemocratic principles where the human life is irrelevant because the Communist Party is at the top of the ladder. So this is what I'm saying, that for us, Central Europe, we've seen communism. We do understand what does it mean. We do not romanticize Russia or China as our Western neighbors in Europe, because they have totally different understanding of communism. So I'll be here very direct, and Katya, you already heard my speech at the British Embassy, so I am very happy and honored to be able to say the same here at Warsaw Institute.
Right. Thank you, Joanna. It is true that, I mean, you touched upon three big points which are of interest not only for Poland and Hungary, but also for the rest of Europe. I mean, on the one hand, we have maritime security, which we will deal, and I want for you to explain and the relevance, to expose the relevance of this. The second one is about China and Europe in terms of infrastructure. I mean, we have the Belt and Road Initiative vis-a-vis the Three Seas Initiative. And then on the other hand, we have security and defense when it comes to Taiwan and when it comes to Japan initiating a new base or planned a new base for next year, a NATO base. So let me begin with the first one, which is quite relevant nowadays when it comes to environmental degradation and pollution, and also the rising sea level. Now, Joanna, you dealt with this in your book, how the ocean rising level, it's threatening not only the integrity of the countries or the small islands that are present in Oceania and in the Pacific, but also threatening their capacity to trade and their capacity to raise their GDP, and hence their population has been aggravated. Now, please elaborate a little bit on this point, and please emphasize why Central Eastern European countries should be concerned, or not only Central Eastern European countries, but the world should be concerned about this degradation.
Thank you very much. The book you are talking about, and I have it here. We can put the link later on. Exactly, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about sea level rise, we somehow see some sandy beaches, and the water is going up. Well, it's not about that, not to that extent. I myself, I've been sailing across the Pacific Ocean, across those islands last summer for 2 months without entering to any harbor. Fiji, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, up to Palau. And what is it all about? When we count land territory, and then we mark 200 nautical miles as an exclusive economic zone. And then we have continental water. So, and I will not go deep into the law of the sea of those countries. But when the land is shrinking, the maritime zone is also shrinking. So the legal rights and capacity of those Oceania countries to use those areas, they are also shrinking, or maybe even disappear. So by now they are able to use those resources for their own benefit, to fish, to bargain, to trade, to sell some fishing quota to other external or foreign companies. They can also sign contracts on other countries or private investors to do the research, or dig deep sea mining in the seabed, also to put cables and so on and so forth. But ladies and gentlemen, when we are those countries are threatened by the sea level rise, it also means that they will lose their capacity to feed their own population, because we talk about food security, where vessels primarily from China, and I've seen only Chinese vessels all the way 2 months on the Pacific. There were no other nationalities but Chinese vessels fishing, or overfishing, or illegally fishing, or even legally, ladies and gentlemen. This is very malicious behavior, activity by China, because they know how poor Oceania countries are, and still they send their big fleets to overfish. And why is it so important? From our European perspective, we would say it's only fishing. First of all, fishing is the primary branch of economy in Oceania, and secondly, this is very often the only source of protein for Oceania populace. So without that, they will simply die. Also, it's a part of their heritage, as you pointed out. This is part of their culture. They are a maritime Oceania people. They underline that in their language, in their cultures, in their customs. So this is very important, and just to end up with stability and instability, what can be used when there is a crisis. There will always be countries who would like to use make the benefits out of the crisis. So we can already observe that China is stepping in with humanitarian projects, aid projects, and we all know that nothing comes for free, and this codependence will be even bigger throughout the next months. So we must here in Europe observe that in any kind of crisis, there will be always malicious actors willing to use that.
Indeed, indeed. And let me further expand on this point, on the last point. Not only does it affect in trade, I mean, 5 to 10% of the trade that it's been from Central European countries goes through the South China Sea. And that is also a massive control from Chinese control of those ports will definitely affect to the detriment our countries here in Europe. Now, not only that, but also on the sociological aspect. I mean, pressure countries have the potential to rise migration, and then the migratory flows, which will eventually end up in bigger countries like Japan, Singapore, but also will end up coming to Europe, and that for sure will might complicate or intensify the already fragile relations. Now, let me go to the second point that we touched upon. It focused more on economic terms. Now, Chaba, you did your research predominantly on the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, since 2016, the Three Seas Initiative has coming to arise, and we're proud that it has consolidated, and we're proud of Hungary as well, that it has almost more than 10 ongoing projects. Now, Hungary was also one of the first countries that introduced and supported the Belt and Road Initiative, and now has been working more on the Three Seas. How do you see these relations between these two projects or these two initiatives? And how has Hungary modeled through this relation in complying with its European partners, but at the same time complying with the partners in Beijing?
Okay, I would go from the big picture down. So, well, so far, yes, Hungary was trying to balance between the two, and I think the main view of the Belt and Road Initiative was to diversify trade relations, and geopolitics was not that much in mind. But talking about the big picture, I think talking about China's influence, as we are approaching this peak China event, as China is slowing down, China will have less and less fuel to do this kind of financial expansion, and I think this will be likely be spontaneously curbed back bit by bit by other powers as well. For instance, according to the IMF data, China's FDI has decreased by 40% to the rest of Asia during the period of 2020-2022 compared to the period of 2015-2020, and it decreased by more than 30% to emerging Europe during the same time frame. So, so to me, it seems that, also regarding the Belt and Road Initiative in Europe, and also regarding Chinese influence in the Pacific, China will have less and less fuel to do this influencing policies, and the rise of India and other powers in the region will mean that they will increasingly become competitors of China in this field. And I think talking about the Chinese communist regime, this slowdown will also signal hard days to come for the Chinese regime itself, as the basis of the Chinese social contract for decades has been that China's GDP growth cannot be slower than 7%. And now it seems that for most of the rest of the decade, it will be around 4%, perhaps even less. Perhaps it will be only 3%.
Right. So it is true that there is this conception that when one power drops, another will rise. And as you say, Trevor, well, the expectation can be either India, Taiwan, Japan. Certainly, Japan is a strong candidate, Singapore. But I would like to delve a little bit further on the point that you mentioned in Hungarian, well, Budapest Beijing relations. Now, during a recent trip to Beijing in May, Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs Peter Szijjártó praised China's peace plan for Ukraine. Now, the visit was also marked by the usual political rhetoric about the strong partnership between the two states, with Hungary portraying as China's true and to some extent last remaining ally in Europe. Now, Hungary does not possess a unique Indo-Pacific strategy, but has a Chinese strategy. Now that you mentioned that China's power and FDI is decreasing, or the peak has been reached, what are the venues for Hungary then? What comes after this drop begins?
I think it hasn't been decided yet. So it's we still to see. Now I think last year Hungary received a great share of Chinese FDI in Europe. So now the policy, as of now, seems to be to get a greater share of the shrinking cake, a greater slice of the shrinking cake. But I think it's still. I think the policy for these changed circumstances hasn't been decided yet. It seems to me.
All right. So, Joanna, we already spoke. If China drops and India rises, how will the Polish-Indian relations turn about? Or what can you tell us about this perspective?
Well, first of all, I am far less optimistic as my colleague now that there is China collapsing. No, sorry, sir,
No,
I
I
will
didn't
totally
say
disagree.
collapsing. Just a word. I didn't say collapsing. It's just say slowing down. But okay, go on. So it's not the same like collapse or slow down. But go on.
Of
Go on.
course, it is not. It is not. But no, I would not say that they are not slowing down. They have the largest ever globally navy. US was always the first, but now China is now better. They have the largest army in Asia, and their impact on the many countries globally. Here, I mean, basically, they have whole Africa. Basically, they have whole southern America, and now they step into Oceania. So they have enormous political impact. So that's why I always preach that we need India on our side, because India will definitely not like to be only a balancer, as it is now called, so balancing between China and the US or the Western countries. They know how much they value. Yes, they now have bigger population than China, younger population, more willing to work, more open, educated, traveling across the globe. So this is totally different story. But then again, if they would be neglected or they would be not given respect, they would not have any problem to cooperate with China. And this is why I always say that actually Turkey in Europe is like India. As I also teach military students, I cooperate with officers. I see this negative phenomenon that Turkey is not respected. We don't take benefit of their geopolitical location, but also the geopolitical power they can have with balancing between European Union and Middle East. So that's why, even though, yes, they are not saint, nobody is in international relations, but we must keep them close, because if we will not take them with respect every nation expects and deserves on international arena, then they would not have, again, a problem with cooperating with Russia or other countries against our values. So this is very essential. And lastly, Katia, as you pointed, that Polish Indian relations are growing. Even here in my hometown, Wrocław in Poland, there was a big exhibition of Polish Indian diplomatic relations. They put posters also on a tram here in Wrocław. There are many museums, many factories. I've seen a lot of these tables, those plates. With embroidered good Polish Indian relations. So it's also investment in students. Look at universities in Poland, how many Indian students are here, how many experts, engineers in specialists in artificial intelligence. So the demand on their power is huge, and we must remember they also represent their own country, and therefore yes, we need India for our own benefit, because again, if we will neglect them, if we will not take them seriously, then they would not be able to work with us, because again, why should they have their own pride and dignity as every country.
No, it's true, and thank you for highlighting this. Well, not only Indian population is very present in Poland, but also Polish population is very present in India, in New Delhi, and this is something that it's normally not spoken about. I mean, there is the relation, there is the common understanding, and it is our in our interest to also facilitate this dialogue. I would like to turn a little bit on, well, to Japan, and your first point, Joanna, was about the standing army of the Chinese standing army and the Chinese naval exercises, and well, the presence. Now, NATO is planning to open its first Asia liaison office in Tokyo next year, and while this to facilitate cooperation with Asian partners, the move might also further heighten existing tensions between Japan and China, not to mention Taiwan, of course. And as a NATO member, also I would like to bring Hungary's approach in this regard. How is Hungary likely to react to this new opening and intensifying of relations? So first, I would like to turn to Chaba, and then we will return to Joanna.
You mean the NATO relations?
Yes, how Hungary's perception will evolve or will affect in this regard. I mean, Hungary has been very vocal toward the move of NATO, especially with regards to Finland accession and Swedish accession. Now, can we expect a similar pattern of behavior of Hungary's defense minister or even Orban?
Who? I don't know yet. I don't know that I expect maybe keeping some kind of distance, but I cannot tell that. But reflecting back to what Joanna said, and also about Hungary's relations. First about Hungary's relations, I think since Hungary's East Asia policy wasn't meant to be just China, so I think it would surprise me if the slowdown of China and the rise of India wouldn't bring a diversification in this policy of Hungary as well, opening up to India as well. And back to how much China is actually slowing down or not, I would reflect what you said in 3 points. So first, about the largest navy in the world, it may be the largest in the number of ships, but if you view tonnage, which means like the tonnage of each of the ships and vessels of a certain navy and sum it up, in tonnage, China still lags far behind the US. So it may have more small ships, but if you sum it up, it's still like you cannot equal a coastal guard boat with an aircraft carrier. So in these metrics, China still lags far behind the US. About why I think that this slowdown of China is coming, the drop of Chinese FDI with 30 and 40% along the Belt and Road is, I think, quite a solid evidence that something is happening and something big is happening. And also data on Chinese demographics came out that just last year China acknowledged to the UN that its population is about 100 million less than they previously thought it is, and there is even data research by an excellent researcher, Yi Fuxiang, which suggests that even the present revised data of China's population may be exaggerated, and that China's real population, instead of the 1.4 billion that we think it is now, may be just 1.28 1,280 million people. Because like metrics like BCG vaccines given to infants suggest that the number of Chinese infants born in the year 2020 may be as much as 40% lower than the official figures. So this is what I can say to support what I said about China's slowdown. I could add these figures. That the
We understand.
demographic.
Thank you for the.
Sorry, just one
Right.
sentence.
So
That
it's.
okay.
No. Please. My apologies.
That a demographic nosedive, a demographic collapse, seems to be on the way, with a significant double-digit discrepancy in working age population in the upcoming 20-30 years compared to the figures on which forecasts by IMF and other organizations are based.
Thank you for the clarification. Now it definitely brings another light and another understanding that it is not on decrease, but it's in slowing down in population and FDIs. Now, Joanna, your work in Virginia can certainly give us some light on this. How do you perceive, or how do we expect NATO-Polish-US relations in the Indo-Pacific, predominantly now with Japan installing its new Japanese NATO base?
Yes, I was making my notes. First of all, never underestimate the enemy. We can laugh at them. We can think that they are slowing down or whatever your terminology, sir, is. But we are laughing at Russians, and guess what? They are still killing Ukrainians. So don't say that we are safe, good enough, because the enemy already, closed down their stuff and getting away. Because we have to prepare for the fight. Either this is military, civilizational, economic struggle, or most likely artificial intelligence and commercial espionage and all the thing in cybersecurity against China. And this will be happening. That's why NATO is working so closely with Indo-Pacific partners. And here I use partners because according to Washington Treaty, those countries from outside the Euro-Atlantic zone, they cannot become members, they cannot become associate members, as such a category does not exist, or even observers. So this is very important that again, for the second time in NATO history, 4 countries from Indo-Pacific, namely Australia, New Zealand, Republic of Korea, and Japan, were invited for the summit last year in Madrid, next month in Vilnius, because NATO is collecting their allies, their partners, like-minded countries, because we need to work together. So therefore this close cooperation is essential. And therefore, liaison officer, as you, Katya, mentioned, in Tokyo, I know that Australia is the second in line, waiting also to have such person, because from the military point of view, this is very essential to have a point of contact, one person responsible for that. So in case of any emergency, but also at daily basis, exchange of data. This is essential, that we establish the official person, official proceedings. So chain of command is involved as well. So this is very important, and I could only see that NATO is getting more serious about Indo-Pacific, not only about European architecture, but also Indo-Pacific architecture, to be prepared to the future war. And again, I know that whenever I say this, people are like, no, don't say that, there will not be any confrontation. And of course, I hope it will not. But I prefer to prepare for such eventuality, instead of just being sure that everything will be okay, because that was exactly the case with Ukraine. Here we in Central Europe were warning Western countries, don't trust Russia. Russian imperialist appetite has never been gone for good. Those countries were like, no, you are Russophobes, of course you have no right to say that. And we're like, please trust us, we know what we are saying. So it's always better, and according to this famous Latin expression, si vis pacem para bellum, so if you want peace, prepare for the war.
Right, what words. Indeed, we have seen definitely this. I mean, we have learned from history, and Chapa, you can definitely, as a historian, can attest to this. How exactly countries are being lured by economic gains, and when it is not about geopolitics, it's about geoeconomics, or it's about profits. Now, in the beginning, China extended its presence in Central Eastern Europe. Later, it was the realization that we had to take a step back and be sort of more sovereign or more aligned to the Western values. However, this did not happen in the Indo-Pacific or in Oceania, where now Cambodia, or since last year, Cambodia sold a port to the Chinese, and the Chinese are now increasing their navy bases in these different ports. Now, last year, this raised quite a tremendous alert for the United States that the Chinese naval presence in this strait could signify a choke point. Now, this for sure is likely to become a hot topic as well for the United States foreign policy in the Indo-Pacific after the United States elections. Now, but before we speak about the after, we need to speak about the current. How do we see, or how can we prognose that the Indo-Pacific policy will affect the United States elections? Now, this is quite a broad topic that perhaps falls a little bit out of your expertise, but I would love to hear your remarks on this as a final point. Please, Joanna.
Thank you very much for this question. First of all, I would like to point on that Shangri-La dialogue, biggest in the Pacific meeting of ministries of security. What was the presence and stance of China, Chinese Minister of Defense, and American Secretary of Defense? When journalists ask both of those gentlemen how they see the future of Indo-Pacific, what would be the next action of those two countries towards Indo-Pac and primarily in Oceania countries. American version was very soft, I think was far too soft. And again, I'm not defending Americans, but then I know that Americans, they stand on the same values as here we in Europe. So the words what Lloyd Austin said, it was that we don't know yet, we will analyze accordingly, we shall see. And there was nothing clear, that was nothing sharp as it was really expected by many Oceania countries who are stuck in between. With whom should they cooperate, who will bring them more investments and more money on humanitarian projects. And when I say humanitarian projects, I've been there, I've seen that we talk about really poor undeveloped countries with no connection to internet or hot water, where food is shipped in cans, meaning a lot of salt and unhealthy stuff in it. While Chinese general, also Minister of Defense, Li Quenda, sorry for my pronunciation, he was very defensive. He was saying that US should back off Pacific, that this is internal matter of China, also claiming South China Sea. This is their issue, so they will be prepared. They are already prepared for any obstacles in the region. So you can see that actually who won this PR fight for Indo-Pacific in this largest defense security forum. And as for the election, I would say that this current Democratic candidate is soft, is not going to any confrontation, but then who is using this opportunity? China is. So when, and most likely Republican candidate will win now, as far as I am concerned, and I also cooperate with various American institutions, so we can assume that now this is turn for Republicans, so it would be more underlining of American democratic values, coming back to free association states, because also those close defense partners like Palau or Marshall Islands, they suddenly said that they are pro-China, not pro-Taiwan. So it all shows that something is going wrong with American allies in the Pacific, and somebody has to step in, otherwise it will be all gone, and that those countries will be already in the pocket of China.
Right. On that note, stepping in now, Chaba, you're an expert at the Danube Institute, and I would like to introduce you the question. Many of European countries do not have a policy towards the Indo-Pacific. I mean, in its majority is the typical. I mean, France, Germany, Italy to some extent, Spain, well, a little bit less, but still Slovakia has none. Lithuania has a strong one now, but recently Poland is becoming a more, as the center of gravity also in Europe shifts towards more a stronger presence in Poland. Now, I would like to ask you, should Central Eastern European countries, and please elaborate as much as you like, take a more firm stand in in the Indo-Pacific? Should Central Eastern European countries begin to take an active role, not only on the humanitarian side or not only on the military side, but also on the economic side, which is actually one of the most important elements in our presence in the Indo-Pacific? So how do you envision our trajectory in Central Eastern Europe, and then the future outlook once once the US elections come to an end? I mean, that will certainly maybe a stabilizing element or a destabilizing element. So how do we see our presence in the Indo-Pacific?
Oh, our whole region is extremely small compared to the Asia Pacific, so I think that gives reason to very cautious approach in the region. Back to the U.S. elections, I think if we look at the actions of different U.S. governments, we can see a surprising consistency between the two previous U.S. administrations, the Biden and the Trump administrations. Like both of them are pursuing the Quad, which I think is the most important U.S. security arrangement in the region, the strategic partnership between the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia. And both administrations were consistent and in the policy of reshoring as well as sanctions against China. And I don't know. Should I add some remarks on relations between Asian countries as well, or stop here?
We still have about 5 minutes before our concluding remarks, but please.
Oh, okay. So as you mentioned, Cambodia, I think we can see several examples on the opposite end. Like in the past decade, since I think there was a turning point around 2010-11, and since then, Japanese policies on China became more assertive. Same thing happened in South Korea, Taiwan with the presidency of the DPP candidate, and also in the Philippines with Marcos Jr. and also in Indonesia with Jokowi. So, for instance, earlier this year we saw an agreement between Vietnam and Indonesia delimiting their exclusive economic zones in the South China Sea, and we of an area of the South China Sea that China also claims as its own, and more recently Modi's visit to the US and the agreement between South Korea and Vietnam. So while countries like Cambodia are a few countries more mostly Cambodia, Laos, maybe Myanmar as well, are really giving in to China or aligning themselves with China, there is a much larger group of Asian countries that are more and more standing up to China, with Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, India included.
I understand. No, great. Thank you for this thorough elaboration. Now, Joanna, we have come to an end. Would you like to comment lastly on this?
Yes, thank you very much. And here I would like to quote, because I know that you would like that comparison between Indo-Pacific and Central Europe. So it's not my words. It comes from Japanese defense forces, and it goes as the following: Japan is Poland, the Philippines is Romania, China is Russia, and Taiwan is Ukraine.
Oh, makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you
Indeed.
very much. We should be
Indeed.
prepared, and we should learn more about those two regions. So thank you, Katya. Thank you, Warsaw Institute, for giving us this chance to share our knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Chava. And let me just introduce to our viewers as well that this panel is one out of two. We have two experts as now from Central Eastern Europe countries. The next edition will come the next month, where we will invite two experts, one from India and one from Taiwan, to further expand on the points that we discussed today, but with their perspective. We believe that it is also important not only to offer the perspective of Central European countries to the Indo-Pacific, but also to hear their perspective about Central Eastern Europe. Now, giving the voice, but also openly discussing these topics to strengthen relations and to broaden our knowledge and expertise. Now, Chava, Joanna, thank you very much for joining us in this edition. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.